He's going to put an executive order in place to take away Harvard's tax exempt status. He doesn't have the right to do that. He doesn't have the authority or the power. But the media doesn't say that. They just say that he's going to do it. That's not reporting the news, man. Am I wrong in that?
No, you're not wrong in that. What they don't do, and I wish they would, and some people do. I mean, I don't know about in this because I don't watch her show because I'm usually asleep by that time. But like Rachel Maddow is very good at going over the history of a subject before actually talking about the topic, which needs to be done more often. Now, what I did is I looked at like executive orders and like where what is the deal, where did they come from, and all of that. And originally, I mean, George Washington did the first executive order. They weren't called executive orders then, but what he did is it's a written directive coming from the president. And what he did is he wrote a directive saying that these what used to be called department heads, now we call them secretaries, of like the Treasury Department and the Defense Department, which used to be called the War Department, and all that they needed to directly report on a regular basis to the president. That was something that George Washington wrote up, signed, and said, this is the way this needs to happen. That was an executive order. And an executive order is something that has the power of law unless it's challenged, but it's a way for the president to make executive decisions, without having to fight with Congress. However, where Congress is not living up to their responsibility is that if what the president comes up with is unconstitutional, is illegal, they should step in and deal with it because they have oversight powers, but they're not doing that.
Exactly.
So they started becoming, just a little history lesson, they started becoming called executive orders during the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, another Republican. And a very famous executive order was one by Truman when he desegregated the military. That was done by executive order.
Executive Order 9981 paved the way to end military segregation, mandating equal treatment. The order was one of the first presidential actions on civil rights and a key step toward broader desegregation in America.
That also contributed to him not being reelected. My father was in the last segregated, he was in the 92nd, which was the last all-black military troop.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I get very upset because that not that they shouldn't get it, but when you talk about blacks in the World War II, what do they always talk about? The Tuskegee Airmen. Yeah, okay. The Tuskegee Airmen were great. They were great.
But there were more.
And the 92nd, they sent the 92nd to Italy. Why did they send the 92nd to Italy? Because in Italy, they were fighting a guerrilla war where the Italians were up in the hills shooting down, and it was just like a meat grinder. And that's where they sent the brothers. But anyway, that's another story.
I can see you being upset about that. I'm upset for you, but I didn't know that your dad was part of that. Yeah, that's deep, man.
He was in the 92nd. He was in the 92nd Infantry Division, which was the last all-black infantry division. And I can tell you all kinds of horror stories that he told me about them. But anyway, but when you get into the Nixon and Reagan years, that's when executive orders started being used in a questionable way. Nixon used them for good things and bad things. Nixon, that's how we got the EPA. That's how we got the DEA. Executive order, Richard Nixon. He started those departments, and they were done by executive order. Those are for good things. But he also used executive privilege to try to skirt the Watergate investigation, and also did use it other ways. Reagan was the first president to start using them for a conservative agenda, to start doing things like weaken civil rights rules. And what he did is you probably heard of the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. What he did is he formed that by executive order, and what they did was their job was to look at what any type of law or program that was being put out by the government and say whether they're efficient or not efficient. And if they were deemed to be inefficient, then he could slow them up. And so that's how they slowed up a lot of civil rights things that were passed, because the office of OMB could do that. That's what he did.
Sounds very similar to Doge.
Very similar. So Trump, during his first term, I believe, he did write quite a few executive orders. So did Obama, but Obama did. The difference between Obama executive orders and Trump executive orders, from my point of view, were Obama executive orders had a lot to do with the public welfare. The Affordable Care Act, before it became law, was an executive order. So he did a lot of that stuff because Congress wasn't working with him. Well, but Trump was doing stuff like the Muslim ban and all that kind of stuff.
That's the difference. Yeah,
he's doing now.
Yeah.
And so one of them, like you said, is with the Harvard's tax exempt status. All of these things are done not for public welfare. They're not done for that. They're done for as acts of retribution for him because somebody didn't do what he wanted them to do.
Exactly.
And or he uses them as a way to circumvent Congress. That's what the executive order, by definition, is done to circumvent Congress. But it can't be doesn't have any real footing if Congress steps up.
It can't be unconstitutional. It can't be. He can do that to circumvent Congress as long as it's not unconstitutional.
Right. So a lot of that stuff is being challenged. A lot of that stuff is being challenged right now in the courts, just like the Affordable Care Act was being challenged in the courts. But that was one. That's why we have it. But he's like doing the birthright citizenship thing and all of that. That is done was done by executive order. One of the biggest problems I have when I talk to, very seldom nowadays, whenever I talk to somebody who wants to defend the Trump policies, the MAGA policies, there are some, very few, but there's some that I think have some legitimate basis in being a topic that needs to be reviewed. Okay?
Like what?
Like birthright citizenship. I think birthright citizenship should be, because birthright citizenship, I'm not saying, I don't know where I stand on the actual how it goes out, but see, if the discourse isn't happening in the Congress and the people aren't voting on it, then all we do is have this guy who says, oh, we're going to end birthright citizenship because I don't like immigrants. That's not why I don't think birthright citizenship makes sense. Although I do know a lot of, and I know that social media may come for me with this, but the reason birthright citizenship was is in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution is because of slavery, and because the descendants because slaves were not citizens. When slaves were freed here, our descendants who weren't citizens, had children. Right? So there was if you have children, anyone who was born on U.S. soil, they said, okay, these people are citizens. All right? And that was the real impetus for that law. Great. Because guess what? We more than freaking earned our citizenship here. Absolutely.
You got that right. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I do know that there are some countries that birthright citizenship. Not the majority from what I can see. And it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me. Like if I went to, if I took a pregnant woman to England and she gave birth for that kid to be a citizen of Great Britain, that doesn't make much sense to me. I just don't, it just doesn't make sense to me. Unless I were a citizen.
It doesn't make sense because you went to London, had the child, your wife, your girlfriend had the child, Now they are a London citizen,
Right.
but you live in the U.S., so you feel that the child should
Well,
be.
no, it's not even. It's not. I don't even see. I'm not saying that there isn't a good reason for birthright citizenship. It's saying I don't fully see the good reason for it. That's where the difference is. That's where I have a problem with some of these people, these freaking MAGA people. It's
Mhm.
like, look, I'm not saying that there's some things, not many, like this is one of the few, very, very few, maybe the only one, where I can say, okay, that's something we can discuss.
Mhm.
Because right now, I can't fully defend why birthright citizenship makes sense.
Well, I'm gonna look at a couple of things with birthright citizen. You went back one thing about Civil War slaves.
Mm,
Uh, well, we know that also that in the South, when it came to voting, they wanted to count the slaves as
right,
well for the population. That's part of the reason we got the electoral college.
right,
So having these kids, that are born here, having them as citizens now, just just gave them the numbers. So
right,
you look at that, but now when you look at it, immigration really helps our country's GDP grow.
absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So, you know, somebody comes from another country. Let's just say, they come from Spain, come over here. They want a better life, or they
Mm-hmm.
want to live out the American dream. They have a
They want to
child
be here.
here. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
they have a child here. They want their child to be an American citizen.
Okay.
So they had their child here. Child is an American citizen. But the thing with they're trying to challenge, which I see that you're kind of going back and forth on, is that okay, should they be allowed? Because the only thing that person did was just come over here so that their child can be an American citizen and that they can stay here and raise their child. I think that what this country is founded on, that should be okay. I mean, think about it. Ellis Island, all those immigrants coming over here. That was the big thing, the American dream. Wasn't a problem then, but it seems to be a problem now because you have a lot of these immigrants mixing in with the white folks. And they're starting to become the minority. What they say by year 2035, 2036,
Mm-hmm.
white people would be the minority. What did the orange guy talk about recently about having more babies? They're concerned about
Yeah, they are.
who
Yeah,
they are.
absolutely,
And that's part
absolutely.
of something that you get with the Heritage Foundation. They've talked about this. All this stuff is outlined in Project 2025. So when I look at this attack on birthright citizenship, there may be some other things that we can discuss later. But for right now, in this moment, I think our concern should be about preserving it as it is. Because all these things that he's trying to mess up and F up is going to be harder to fix after he's gone.